Ready to walk into it?
Anytime you want.
Great. Well, one of the first questions I like to ask is how someone would want themselves to be known. I mean, somebody can look you up online, see that you're a pastor and an academic, see that you're a prolific author. I think on my desk right now I have 4 of your books sitting here. But is there a way that you want people to know who you are?
Wow. Well, people, how would I want people to know who I am? I have a lot of fun where I live, a lot of adventure. I enjoy thoroughly engaging with people, but I love being out on my own, either on my bike or out in the woods. I'm a woodworker and a cabinet maker. But also I am someone who never stops wrestling with, to me, are fundamental questions about how we shape our own lives and the lives of our communities to understand again the presence and the agency of God. So I probably, compared to most people, am obsessed with those questions, and I spend lots of time reading and writing. Yeah,
No, that's a great answer.
there you go.
Were you always was woodworking a thing that you picked up later in life?
No, it was something I picked up in school in England, and carried it over into my late teens and early university years, when I basically worked for my father-in-law, who was a building contractor. So I did construction and knew how to do a lot of that stuff. And then I built all my own furniture when we were first married. And then I dived into what you call life and kind of forgot that side of myself and began to recover it a few years ago.
Oh wow, that's great.
Yeah.
What what led do you what do you think led in your own life to being obsessed with the questions of what shapes our lives and the lives of our communities? Was that a
Well,
consistent thing?
it's, what one's work is always autobiography in some sense.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I don't know how to, I don't know how to explain that one is grasped hold of by God. Um, and I think that was something that was happening in ways I would not be able to explain or describe from an early age. It's not, I mean, I didn't go to church. I was not part of any religious group or organization. But I had this other sense that there was something more I needed to be a part of. I think, secondly, to your question, I was raised in Liverpool, England, in post-war, post-Second World War, and I was raised in what today we would genuinely call neighborhood, where you were known and you were deeply rooted and engaged, and amongst those, what I would call ordinary, simple people, because nobody there was educated. I grew up in a profoundly working class deprived area, but you knew the solidarity of belonging. And I never lost that. When I moved, or my parents emigrated to Canada, and we moved to what essentially was a suburb, there was something deep inside me that knew that this was, what would you say, anti-human? And that I had profoundly lost something. And I think that having lost something, which I would call the local and the neighborhood and that sense of belonging, has colored and characterized all my life in the work that I've done. And part of that is my deep comfort and trust in what today we call working class people, but I would just simply call it the neighborhood and the place of rootedness that, you know, modern day consumer capitalism has managed to almost eradicate.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah.
Was that the question you were asking?
Oh yeah, I think so. Well, it makes a lot of sense. Like you have this sense of rootedness, come to Canada, begin to feel like you lose that sense of rootedness. And then at some point you get, I mean, I know this is jumping forward in the story a bit, but at some point you get involved in ministry. And as I've heard you tell it, it feels like your experience with church culture, it doesn't seem like it gives you a sense of rootedness in the same kind of way.
No, it doesn't. No. My my call, I would call it a calling. I was at university, and I was, like any young adult, discovering the joy and the wonder of university life. I was majoring in philosophy, and essentially my plan was to just continue amassing degrees in philosophy and probably ending up teaching. And I got a pretty major grant. In those days, it was about $15,000, which in the late 60s, early 70s was no small amount. And I used it to go study theology for a year so I could come back and do more work in the philosophy of religion. And in that year, I was studying with a guy called T.F. Torrance, a Scottish Bartian theologian, brilliant man. And I remember sitting in this dark basement, this library about 2 stories down under the ground, and I was reading Richard of St. Victor, which won't mean anything for most people, and I could read him in Latin. And I was sitting there, and I very clearly, God called me. God said, if you love me, you need to love my people and be where my people are. And that was, in that sense, a call to what we would call the church. But the problem is that, and it still hasn't really changed much, that when you sense that vocation, there's a whole system that is going to say, we don't care what kind of round peg you are, there's a square hole we're going to bang you into. And it's called becoming a minister or a pastor or a vicar, and it's getting something called an MDiv, which is a professionalized degree. And so I was always uncomfortable because the only way in which what I would call the Euro-tribal churches can deal with you is to pour you into this mold and measure you on the basis of how well you do around that mold. So that, yeah, I've always had this profound discomfort with what we call the church and that kind of role and place in it. Now, having said that, I did really well by the categories. I mean, each church I went to, it grew significantly. So I knew how to play the game, but I knew that's what it was.